The wind tore through Red Crossing like a living thing that night, dragging the scent of dust, whiskey, and fear through the streets. Lanterns swung wildly on the wooden posts, their flames stretching long and thin before snapping back against the wind. The storm had been building all day, the kind of desert storm that didn't bring mercy, only noise and fury. And now, as the sky split open in streaks of white fire, the sheriff's men dragged a woman onto the stage at the center of town. She was barefoot, thin as a ghost, her hair tangled with mud and her wrists bound in coarse rope. The sheriff's hat brim dripped rain as he shoved her forward. "Bring her up," he barked. "Let's be done before the storm eats us alive." The crowd pressed close beneath the overhangs and balconies, their faces gleaming in the lamplight. Men in oilskin coats, women clutching shawls, children peering from behind fence posts. Curiosity had brought them. The promise of ownership kept them there. A heavy man with a red beard and the auctioneer climbed onto the platform. His voice was rough, half drowned by the wind. $1 to feed her, 10 to own her. He slammed his hammer on the table. The sound echoed against the tin roofs. The woman didn't flinch. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes dark and sharp even through exhaustion. She stared out into the crowd, defiant and unbroken. Somewhere in that sea of faces, a tall man in a weathered hat stood half in shadow. Elias Creed. He'd ridden into Red Crossing only to buy feed and cartridges. He hadn't planned to stop, hadn't planned to look. But when his horse shied at the crowd, he saw her, bound, starving, and yet proud in a way that shamed everyone watching. The wind tugged at his coat, slapping the tails against his legs. He shifted his weight, jaw tightening as the auctioneer's words cut through the storm. "She's Apache," the man shouted, spitting the word like venom. "Caught north of the San Pedro by the cavalry. Her tribe's gone. She's the last of 'em. Better a home than a grave." The crowd jeered, some laughing, others whispering behind hands. Elias's gaze slid past them to the officer standing behind the auction block, a young cavalry lieutenant, boots polished, smirk fixed. The man's fingers toyed with the silver chain of his watch, boredom masking cruelty. Lightning flashed. For a second, the whole square was bathed in blinding white. Faces, weapons, greed, all of it laid bare. $10, someone shouted. 12, another answered. 15. The hammer rose again. Elias stepped forward. 50. The word carried clean through the storm. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. 50? He echoed, squinting through the rain. "You got that much, mister?" Elias reached into his coat, pulled out a roll of notes, and tossed them onto the table. They hit with a wet slap. "I got it." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You sure about this, Creed? Ain't smart business buying trouble." Elias's voice came low, steady. "I don't buy people." The words hung there, heavier than the thunder rolling in from the east. A few men muttered. The cavalry officer laughed. "That so?" he drawled. "Then what's your offer, cowboy? You planning to save her with kindness?" Elias met his gaze and didn't blink. "Planning to save her, period." The officer's smile slipped. He nodded to the sheriff, who rested a hand on his revolver. The wind screamed through the empty streets, shaking the signboards until they clattered like bones. The woman looked up, her eyes locking onto Elias's. She said something then, soft, broken by wind and language. He couldn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. Disbelief, maybe warning. The auctioneer hesitated. His hammer hovered. $50, he muttered. "Do I hear 60? The crowd grumbled. The sheriff's fingers twitched near his holster. "Sell it, Joe," someone shouted. "Storm's coming." Lightning cracked again, closed this time. The rain came harder, pelting the stage, soaking through clothes and hats. The hammer came down, but before it struck wood, the cavalry officer stepped forward. "Not yet," he said. "The law's not done here." He grabbed the woman's arm. She cried out, twisting, the ropes biting into her skin. Elias's hand went to his gun. "Let her go." The words were calm, quiet, but they cut like a blade. The officer smirked. "Or what? You'll shoot a soldier of the United States Army over an Indian?" The thunder answered before Elias could. The storm broke wide open, a deafening wall of rain and wind. The hammer slammed down, wood splitting under the force. The crowd erupted, some shouting, some scattering for cover. Elias moved first. He knocked the officer's hand away, grabbed the woman by the waist, and pulled her from the stage. The crowd roared in protest. The sheriff drew his revolvers, and gunfire split the night. The first shot went wide, shattering a lantern. Fire spilled across the mud, sparks dancing up into the rain. The second bullet tore through Elias's hat, close enough to burn his scalp. He spun, returning fire. One sharp crack that dropped the sheriff's deputy where he stood. People screamed. The auctioneer ducked for cover. The officer yelled orders lost to the storm. Elias kicked free a rope from the post, slinging it across his shoulder as he pulled the woman toward his horse. "Move," he barked, throwing her up onto the saddle. She didn't fight him this time. She clung to the horn as he swung up behind her. The horse reared, panicked, hooves striking sparks against the stones. Then they were gone, tearing through the rain, thunder in their wake. Behind them, the storm swallowed Red Crossing whole. The crowd's shouts faded into the howling wind, replaced by the echo of gunfire, and the ghostly sound of the auctioneer's voice carried off into the night. For a long time after, no one in Red Crossing spoke of the man who bought a slave, but called it freedom, nor the woman whose eyes held lightning brighter than the storm that saved. Heard Elias Creed had once known peace, the kind that comes with hard work, open land, and a woman's laughter echoing through the morning mist. But a year before the auction, before the dust and the thunder and the hollow eyes of the Apache woman, that peace had been buried under a cottonwood tree behind his ranch. The wind that night was cruel, carrying the scent of smoke and blood from miles away. Raiders had come without warning, torching fences and barns, shooting at shadows. Martha had tried to save the horses. By the time Elias found her, she was lying on the porch, her dress dark with blood, her hand trembling against his cheek. "Don't hate them, Eli," she whispered. "Not all sins wear the same face." Her breath was warm only for a second longer. Then the storm swallowed her words and the night went still. Elias sat there until dawn, until the first light touched the hills, until her hand went cold in his. He buried her himself, digging through the frozen earth until his palms split open. He laid her wedding ribbon on the grave, then her silver locket, then the revolver she'd once begged him to give up. When it was done, he stood alone beneath the cottonwoods, his hat low, his back bent, and whispered, "No more guns, no more killing." He hung the revolver on the wall of his cabin after that. Every morning he'd pass it without looking. Every night he'd drink enough whiskey to forget the sound of her dying breath. But the land didn't care about promises, and the West never stayed quiet for long. When the day of the auction came, the storm had been building since dawn. Elias hadn't planned to go to town. He only needed feed and lamp oil. But when he heard the crowd, when he saw that wooden platform and the bound woman trembling in the wind, something in him cracked, the same place that had never healed after Martha's death. He'd tried to stop it with words, but words in Red Crossing were cheaper than lead. The sheriff's eyes had narrowed, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. When the crowd began to jeer, Elias felt the old heat in his chest, the fire he thought had died under the cottonwoods. "I said I'll pay 50, he repeated, voice steady, cutting through the roar of the storm. "And I don't buy people." The auctioneer looked to the sheriff. The sheriff looked to the cavalry officer, a man with slick hair and polished boots, watching with the smug smile of someone who owned both law and conscience. The officer gave a nod and everything went to hell. Elias didn't remember drawing his gun. One moment he was reaching for his hat, the next the sheriff was shouting, and a gunshot split the air. The crowd scattered like cattle under lightning. He grabbed the woman, Naya he would learn later, and pulled her behind him. The thunder rolled, horses screamed, and bullets tore splinters from the wooden stage. "Run!" he barked, but she didn't move. She looked at him like she was weighing his soul. Then, without a word, she followed. They sprinted through the back alley, boots slapping through puddles, gunfire chasing them down every turn. Elias threw a handful of coins at the feed store clerk, mounted his horse, and pulled her up behind him. Rain stung their faces as they rode out of town, the sky boiling with lightning. Behind them, the sheriff's men rallied. The cavalry officer shouted orders, his voice rising above the wind. "Bring me the girl. Alive if you must." The plains opened wide, soaked and shivering under the storm. The river ahead foamed with runoff, brown and wild. Elias spurred his horse forward. Naya clung to him, trembling but silent. "Hold on," he muttered, tightening his grip on the reins. The current slammed against them, nearly toppling the horse. Gunshots cracked from the far bank. One bullet grazed Elias's hat, spinning it off into the river. He felt the wind of it against his temple, too close to fate for comfort. He turned his head just long enough to see the muzzle flashes. Too many, too organized. They weren't trying to bring her back. They were trying to erase her. "Someone wants you dead, not bought," he shouted over the storm. Naya's voice, hoarse and cold, cut through the rain. "Then you ride with death, cowboy." The horse climbed the opposite bank, soaked and shivering, but alive. Elias didn't look back. He just kept riding into the black horizon, where lightning danced over the plains like a warning from God himself. The cabin leaned against the slope like it was too tired to stand. Its roof sagged under the weight of the rain, each droplet slipping through the cracks and hissing where it hit the weak fire. The air smelled of rust, wet wood, and smoke, the kind of smell that clung to a man's clothes and followed him for days. Elias Creed pushed open the door, half carrying the woman inside. She was light, too light for someone still alive. Mud streaked her skin, and her hair hung in heavy ropes across her face. He set her near the hearth, tossing a handful of dry twigs onto the fire. The flames sputtered, caught, and spread their orange glow across the dirt floor. Her wrists were raw where the ropes had been. She didn't thank him. Didn't even look at him. Her eyes moved instead to the gun at his hip, then to the door, and measuring her chances. He noticed. "You run now, they'll find you before dawn," he said. His voice was rough but calm, like a man talking to his own conscience. Storm's got every creek running high. She didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on his face, the jagged scar that ran from his jaw to his ear, the kind earned in close fights where both men bleed. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin. The beans inside were cold, the bread hard, but it was something. He set it beside her. "Eat," he said. She glared at the food like it was poison. "You saved me for what?" she asked finally, her accent thick, her tone sharp as flint. "To sell me again?" Elias looked up from the fire, the orange light cutting his face in half. One side shadow, one side flame. "To set you free," he said quietly. "That's all." Her expression didn't change. The rain thudded harder on the roof, drumming like distant hooves. Elias shifted closer to the wall, watching her more than the fire. He'd seen that look before, in prisoners, in soldiers, in men who'd lost everything and didn't trust what little was left. He wanted to tell her about Martha, about the promise he'd made beside that grave. But words felt useless now, so he sat there letting silence fill the room. A gust of wind pushed through the cracks, making the lantern flicker. Then under the sound of rain came something else, a faint metallic jingle, the rhythm of reins and spurs. Elias froze. Through a slit in the boards, he saw a flicker of movement down the trail. A lone rider wrapped in a slick oilskin coat scanning the horizon. Cavalry. Elias's hand went to the lantern. He pinched out the flame and darkness swallowed them both. The woman didn't move, but her breathing slowed. Quiet, practiced. He realized then. She was used to being hunted. In the dark, her voice came low and steady. "They hunt what they fear." Outside, the rider paused. The horse snorted, uneasy. For a moment, Elias thought they were found. Then the sound faded, the horse turning back toward the ridge. He exhaled slowly, but just as he thought the danger had passed, more hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Heavier, closer, too many to count. He looked at her, eyes wide. She met his stare without flinching. "They come for both of us now," she whispered. The fog lifted slow and heavy over the canyon that morning, pale and silver like smoke from the dying world. Elias Creed rode hard, his horse lathered and trembling beneath him. Behind him, the woman clung tight, her breath warm against his shoulder. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the sharp edge of gunpowder and rain. Ahead stretched miles of red stone and sage, the Badlands, where the earth itself seemed carved from sorrow. "Keep low," he said, voice rough from the night's silence. Naya didn't answer, only motioned with her hand toward a narrow cleft in the rock. She knew this land, the secret veins beneath the desert where only ghosts dared walk. They cut through the canyon, hooves muffled in the sand. Ravens circled high above, their cries echoing through the cliffs like warnings. Behind them came the faint rhythm of pursuit, disciplined, measured, too exact for drifters or bounty men, soldiers, the U.S. cavalry. Elias didn't need to look to know who led them. He could feel it like the taste of rust in his mouth. Lieutenant Braxton Hale, the same man whose men had raided Elias's homestead. The same man who'd smiled while Martha bled out in his arms. Hale rode beneath a crisp flag that fluttered in the wind, the gold trim catching sunlight. But his eyes, those cold blue eyes, were lit with a fire that had nothing to do with duty. He wasn't chasing orders. He was chasing ghosts. Bring me the squaw and the traitor. Hale's voice cracked across the canyon like a whip. Dead or alive? The echo carried far. Elias felt the words crawl up his spine. He glanced back once, seeing the dust rise behind the soldiers. 12 men in formation, rifles gleaming. He spurred the horse harder. They broke from the canyon into open desert. The sun hit them full in the face. Elias squinted, tasting blood and grit. The mare's hooves stumbled on loose shale. Then came the first shot, a clean crack that split the morning. The bullet struck the rock beside them, throwing shards into Naya's cheek. She didn't flinch. Left, she shouted, her voice slicing through the wind. Elias turned sharply toward a ridge. But the next shot came quicker. The horse screamed, legs buckling beneath it. Elias hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of him. The mare rolled, kicking once before going still. Move, he rasped, grabbing Naya's arm and dragging her behind a scatter of rocks. Another bullet slammed into the dirt inches from his boot. He raised his Colt, sighted over the stone, and fired once, twice. The second shot found its mark. A cavalryman tumbled from his saddle, the echo bouncing off the cliffs. 2 more to your right, Naya hissed, her eyes sharp, scanning the ridge. She spoke like a scout, not a victim. Elias fired again, each round deliberate. Patient. The rhythm of a man who'd fought enough wars to know panic was death. Then, through the smoke and dust, he saw Hale. The lieutenant sat tall on his black stallion, saber gleaming at his side, face calm as polished steel. Elias Creed, Hale called out. You always had a taste for lost causes. Elias didn't answer. He waited, reloaded, then fired at the sound of the voice. The bullet struck the saddle horn, close enough to make Hale's horse rear. The officer yanked the reins, steadying the beast. But that hesitation was all Naya needed. She grabbed a fist-sized rock and hurled it with every ounce of her strength. It struck the stallion square on the muzzle. The horse screamed and reared again, nearly throwing Hale. Now! She shouted. Elias grabbed her hand and they ran. Low, fast, slipping between boulders and scrub. The gunfire followed, but the terrain turned in their favor. The land rose into a twisting maze of mesas and gullies, places no cavalry line could follow. By the time the last echo faded, the desert swallowed them whole. Back on the ridge, Hale steadied his breathing, fury coiled in his chest. He dismounted to inspect the ground. Tracks, blood, a scuffed patch of dirt where something had fallen. He crouched and picked up a small silver object half buried in the dust. It was a locket, dull from age but still intact. Inside, a faded portrait, a woman smiling, wearing a ribbon at her neck. Martha Creed. Hale's jaw tightened. The wind caught his hat brim as he stared down the trail where Elias had vanished. His voice came low and venomous. So it's you, he murmured. The rancher I left breathing when I shouldn't have. He snapped the locket shut, eyes narrowing against the sun. Then I'll finish what I started. He turned to his men. Mount up. We ride till the blood dries. The soldiers obeyed, and far ahead beyond the next ridge, Elias Creed felt a chill crawl through his heart. The sense that the past had finally found his trail. Elias woke to the smell of smoke and sage. His head throbbed, his throat burned, and the first sound he heard was a child laughing somewhere close. A sound so out of place in the wasteland that for a moment he thought he was dead and dreaming. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the canyon anymore. He lay beneath a roof of animal hide stretched across wooden poles, and beyond the doorway he could see the copper glow of morning brushing the red cliffs. He tried to sit up, but pain caught in his ribs. A shadow moved beside him, Naya. She pressed a hand to his shoulder, shaking her head. You fell, she said softly. Horse threw you. You hit rock. He glanced around the small shelter. The walls were lined with baskets and blankets, the air heavy with the scent of herbs. Outside, faint voices murmured in Apache, the tones rhythmic and calm. He realized then that he was in a hidden camp, tucked deep in the cliffs where the sun barely touched. The people there moved quietly, a handful of elders, a few women tending fires, children darting between the shadows like small, silent birds, survivors, the last pieces of something that had been broken beyond repair. An old man entered, his hair white as salt, his eyes sharp with the kind of wisdom that came from too much loss. Naya spoke to him in her language, her words low and respectful. The elder crouched beside Elias, studying him the way a hunter studies a wounded wolf. Cautious but not cruel. The old man gestured toward Naya, then to Elias's bandaged arm. His words came slow, deliberate. "You help her," he said in broken English. "You fight soldiers." Elias nodded. "Did what I could." The elder's gaze didn't soften, but he gave a small nod of approval before leaving. Naya sat beside him for a long moment silent. The firelight caught her face, strong, scarred, and beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with gentleness. She spoke at last. "You should know who I am. They call me Naya of the White Mesa. I was sent to talk peace with the Bluecoats 2 winters ago. I brought them food, words, hope. But their captain, Hale," she spat the name like poison. He smiled. He offered his hand. Then his men opened fire. My father died there. My people scattered. The ones they didn't kill, they took. Elias's stomach turned cold. The rain outside the shelter dripped in slow, steady beats like the ticking of a clock. "Hale," he whispered. "Lieutenant Braxton Hale?" Her eyes narrowed. "You know him?" He looked down, ashamed. "He killed my wife." The words came out rough like gravel scraping the throat. "He led a raid on our land. Said he was clearing out raiders, but all he cleared was everything I had left." He looked at the bandages on his arm, then at her, and the truth settled in his chest like a stone. "Martha's death. Your father's death. It was the same man. The same orders. The same lie." Naya watched him closely. "Then what will you do, Elias Creed?" He pushed himself upright despite the pain. His voice was quiet but steady. "I can't undo the past," he said, "but I can make him answer for it." He stood, reached for his coat, and felt the familiar weight of his revolver against his hip. Not heavy this time, but right. The firelight gleamed off the scar across his jaw. He stepped toward the door, the desert wind brushing against his face. When he was gone, Naya lingered in the dim light of the shelter. On the floor where he'd slept, something small and silver glimmered in the dirt. She picked it up, a locket. Inside was a faded portrait, a woman with kind eyes and a ribbon at her neck. On the back, a single engraved letter. Naya's fingers tightened around it. She knew that symbol. Hale's mark, the one burned into her nightmares. She rose, eyes hard, and followed into the dying light of day. The wind was still when Elias saddled his horse. Dawn had not yet broken, but the first gray fingers of light crawled across the cliffs, catching the edge of his rifle barrel as he checked the chamber. The desert was quiet, too quiet, and that silence carried weight like the pause before thunder. He tightened the cinch and breathed out hard through his nose. He had dreamed of Martha again. Her face in the candlelight, her fingers brushing the scar on his jaw. Her voice had been the same as the day she died, soft, forgiving, too good for this world. When he opened his eyes, all he saw was dust and blood. He'd promised her no more killing, but promises meant nothing when men like Braxton Hale still breathed. He ran his thumb over the worn handle of his revolver. The steel felt strange in his hand after so long, heavy, like a sin picked up again after trying to live without it. He slid it into his holster, eyes flat with resolve. From the shadows behind him came Naya's voice. "You ride for death," he didn't turn. "I ride for what's owed." Her footsteps were soft in the sand. "You kill him," she said quietly. "You become him." Elias's jaw tightened. "If I don't, more die." He faced her then. The wind tugged at her hair, at the edges of the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes, dark, steady-eyed, met his without fear. "You think bullets end a sickness?" she asked. "Men like him, they feed on it. They die, and others wear their face." He looked away toward the horizon where the mesa cut the sky in two. "You don't understand. He took everything from me." Her voice softened. "He took everything from me, too." The fire between them dimmed. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she stepped closer and held something out. A folded piece of parchment, the edges stiff with dried blood. Elias hesitated before taking it. When he unfolded it, he saw the truth written in ink and signatures. A treaty stamped with the U.S. seal, signed by Braxton Hale himself. The page was smudged with red fingerprints, the same ones that had bled from Naya's father before he died trying to protect it. Elias stared at it, the words swimming in his vision. The paper smelled of smoke, of sweat, of everything lost. It's proof, Naya said. He signed peace, then burned it. He killed to hide it. You show this and people will see who he is. He shook his head. People don't want truth. They want a hero to believe in. She stepped closer. Then make them believe in justice instead. He looked at her, really looked. The woman he'd rescued in a storm now stood unbroken before him, fierce as the land itself. In her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in years, the part of himself he thought had died with Martha. Justice needs eyes, not bullets, she whispered. The revolver felt heavier now. He unbuckled the holster, the leather creaking, and set the gun down on a rock. His voice came out low. All right. We do it your way, but if he comes for us first, then we finish it together, she said. The words hung there, carried off by the wind. For the first time, Elias felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Maybe Martha had been right. Maybe mercy wasn't weakness, it was courage in disguise, but the moment didn't last. From far off came a sound that turned his blood to ice. The faint echo of horses, many of them moving fast through the canyon. Then came the glow. Orange light flickering against the walls, dancing across the rock faces like ghosts of fire. Naya's breath caught. They found us. Elias turned, eyes narrowing at the growing ring of torchlight creeping closer from every ridge. Dozens of riders, their shadows stretching long in the dark. Hale's men. He reached slowly for his revolver again, the decision not yet made but the fight already written in the stars. The sun over Red Crossing was cruel that morning, sharp and white as a blade. The town had gathered again in the square, same place, same stage. The wooden platform that had once held a bound woman beneath the jeers of men. Now it held a different spectacle. Soldiers lined the edge of the crowd, rifles gleaming. A banner snapped above the stage in the dry wind. The sheriff paced near the post, his badge glinting, jaw tight. And beside him, Lieutenant Braxton Hale, dressed in polished boots and a clean blue coat. Face calm as stone. He'd called it a reclamation. A new auction, this time to display order. To restore faith in the law after the chaos of Elias Creed's so-called rebellion. The people came because they always did, for spectacle, for fear, for something to believe in. But before dawn, while the town slept and the dew still clung to the hitching rails, Elias had already been there. He'd ridden in through the back of the canyon, cloak dark with dust, horse breathing heavy. Naya rode behind him, silent, eyes fixed on the empty stage that had once been her prison. Together they moved through the shadows, unseen. Inside the old post office, Elias unfolded the blood-stained treaty. Hale's signature stared back at him, bold and proud beneath the U.S. seal. The paper still smelled of smoke and iron. Naya held the oil lamp steady while Elias slipped the treaty into a wooden crate beside the stage, where the supply ledgers and contracts would later be passed out to the townsfolk. He tucked Hale's confession beside it, a letter signed in his own hand admitting the bribes, the massacres, the betrayal. When he straightened, his face was calm. Once they see it, he said, truth'll do what bullets can't. Naya nodded but said nothing. Her eyes drifted toward the rising light, toward the square that would soon fill with men and lies. By midday, the auction square was alive again. Hale stood tall, addressing the crowd with a voice made for command. My friends, he said, spreading his arms wide. We've seen disorder brought to our door, traitors who would sell our safety for savages and thieves. But the Union stands. Law stands. The crowd murmured approval, though uncertainly. Dust rolled down the street. Then another voice cut through the air. That's rich coming from the man who sold peace for silver. Heads turned. Hale froze. From the far side of the crowd, Elias Creed stepped forward, hat low, coat torn, dust rising around his boots. His revolver was holstered, but his eyes burned steady. You sold her people, Elias said, his voice carrying across the silence. And mine. The crowd parted, whispering. Hale's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. You're a wanted man, Creed, and a liar. Elias reached into his coat. The crowd tensed, but instead of a gun, he pulled the folded treaty. He held it high, then tossed it into the front of the gathering. The paper landed in the hands of the general storekeeper, who frowned and opened it. The sheriff leaned over, squinting. Lieutenant, the sheriff said slowly, his tone shifting. This your signature? Hale's color drained. That's classified government property, he snapped. But the damage was done. The murmurs grew into angry shouts. The people began to see. Elias took one step closer to the stage. You killed for profit, Hale. You buried peace under blood and called it duty. Hale's hand twitched toward his pistol. Elias didn't move. You think truth dies easy? Elias asked quietly. The report of Hale's revolver shattered the air. Elias staggered. The sound echoed off the buildings as he dropped to his knees, one hand pressed against the bloom of red spreading through his shirt. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Hale raised his gun again, eyes wild now. But a single rifle crack split the silence before he could fire. The bullet struck him clean in the chest, spinning him backward. He fell against the post, eyes wide in shock before slumping to the ground. Naya stood at the edge of the crowd, rifle smoking, face unreadable. The same platform where she'd once been chained now bore the man who'd enslaved her, lifeless, dust settling around him. The sheriff bent beside Elias, his voice breaking. Stay with me, Creed. Elias tried to speak, but blood filled his throat. His gaze drifted past the sheriff, past the crowd, up to where Naya stood framed by the sun. He smiled faintly, weakly. Guess it's your turn now, he whispered. She dropped to her knees beside him, taking his hand. You didn't fail her, she said softly. Or me. The world around them blurred, shouting, boots, the flag snapping in the wind. The stage creaked beneath them, same as it had the day she'd been sold. But this time it was justice being weighed, not a person. Elias's breath slowed. His fingers loosened. The sound of the wind swallowed his last exhale. Naya sat still, the treaty clutched in her other hand, the town staring in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone began to take down the flag. As the cloth lowered, a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, striking the stage in gold. Elias Creed, the man who'd bought freedom with his last breath, lay where once mercy had been auctioned off. And beside him, the woman once called property rose, her rifle still in hand, her eyes set on the horizon where the world might finally begin again. The rain came quiet that morning, slow and steady like the sky itself was grieving. The people of Red Crossing stood beneath their hats, heads bowed, boots sunk in wet earth. A hole had been dug under the cottonwoods behind the chapel, the same trees where the wind always seemed to whisper the truth no one wanted to hear. The coffin was simple pine, no name carved into it, no cross. Just a folded coat laid across the top and a worn hat resting where a man's heart used to beat. Elias Creed was going into the ground the same way he'd lived, without noise, without ceremony, with only the dust and the wind to speak for him. The preacher mumbled something about forgiveness, but the words barely carried over the rain. No one dared look at Naya. She stood apart from the crowd, soaked to the bone, her face unreadable. Her hair clung to her cheeks, and in her hands she held Elias's hat, like it was something sacred. The townsfolk shifted uneasily. They didn't know whether to call her murderer or savior. In the end, they chose silence. Maybe that was mercy too. The sheriff cleared his throat once, tipped his hat, and walked away. The rest followed one by one, boots squelching in the mud until the sound of their leaving was just another part of the rain. When the last of them had gone, Naya knelt beside the grave. The air smelled of wet cedar and gun oil. She placed the hat gently over the mound of dirt, her fingers trembling for the first time. You said you'd set me free, she whispered. You did, but not like this. She sat there until the rain turned to mist, until the thunder was nothing but a memory rolling somewhere far off. Then she rose, pulled her shawl tight, and walked toward the hitching post where Elias's horse waited. That same gray mare he'd ridden through storms and bullets. The animal turned its head as she approached, soft eyes watching her every step. She touched its neck, feeling the warmth beneath the soaked hide, then swung up into the saddle with quiet grace. The town didn't stop her. No one called out. They just watched from doorways and windows as she rode past, slow at first, then faster as she cleared the last of the buildings and hit the open plain. The sky split open above her, lightning streaking across the horizon, painting her silhouette against the pale dawn. The wind tore at her hair, turning it into a banner of fire in the dim light. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to return to. Far ahead, the desert opened wide, endless and golden, waiting. In her hand, she held the small silver locket, the one that had belonged to Martha Creed. She turned it over once, feeling the weight of 2 lives inside it, the blood that had paid for both. The hinge clicked softly as she opened it. Inside was the faded portrait of a woman smiling through time. Naya traced the outline with her thumb, then closed it and slipped it into her coat. They called her Savage. A voice seemed to whisper through the wind. Elias's voice, maybe memory, maybe something else. But she rode away free, and he died clean. The storm broke behind her, rolling back toward the mountains. Ahead, sunlight spilled across the desert floor. She pressed her heels to the mare's sides, and the horse surged forward, hooves thundering through the wet sand. As she disappeared into the horizon, the camera lingered on her hand, the locket glinting once before the light swallowed it whole. The past and the future bound together by mercy,